Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspective podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a super exciting guest and topic. We have Vikram Bhaskaran. And Vikram, you are going to talk about what is the importance of the ZMOT? What is the ZMOT? And how do we understand that and use that as marketers today? Because we all know that our role in marketing has changed and evolved quite a bit. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about inflection points and customer obsession, and how do we weave that into the customer journey. So before we get into that, though, what I'd love to do is introduce you a little bit. Now, you've headed up marketing at some pretty big SaaS companies, Chargebee and Freshworks. You started out as a software developer in software development, and you actually still have a huge love and passion for software and while you're in the SaaS space. But maybe tell us a little bit more about your background and what you're doing now, and then we'll jump right into the podcast.
Absolutely. So I was trained as a software engineer, but I've never been a software developer in my life. Fortunately, I've never written a line of production code, even in my own startups. But I graduated as an engineer in software, and I was fortunate to stumble into Zoho in the early days of the organization and waded my way into marketing, and that kind of set the trajectory of my career in life. But other than that, yeah, I've been a marketer for about 17 years now, starting from Zoho and Fusion Charts and Freshworks and Chargebee. And I've run a couple of my own startups as well along the way. So that kind of builds a lot of pieces that we'll probably be discussing today.
Fantastic. Let's start out with, you have the idea of this concept of what is the importance of ZMOT? What is that acronym? If you could explain that to us, and then the importance, that'll get us kicked off here.
Absolutely. ZMOT stands for the zero moment of truth. And I picked it up from, I think, one of the Google Day talks that folks at Google were talking about this idea of zero moment of truth, but there wasn't a lot of literature on it. So I just built my own thesis around it, if I may. But the logic of it is pretty straightforward. We understand as marketers and as product folks, we understand pretty much the entire journey of the customer once they come into our worldview, once they say come down to our product or sign up, or even let's say they come down to the website, and we understand what kind of pages they're consuming and what happens subsequent to that. But the real question is, what happens in the customer's life leading up to that moment? Or rather, if you could go into the customer's world one moment before they actually came down to you, which is the first moment of truth that you know about the customer, that would be the zeroth moment of truth. What happened in their lives, their worlds, or their organizations that kind of created that inflection point, that spark to say, hey, you know what? I need to figure out a solution for this problem.
So do you have an example, like a story that you could tell us that gives us, an example of what this looks like?
Yeah, quite a few. One that I personally like is this very detailed research that we did at Chargebee. So for everybody's context, Chargebee is a subscription revenue management platform with a bunch of different products available today. But one of the primary products that we were focusing on back in the day was on subscription revenue management, which is recurring billing and recurring invoicing operations and stuff like that, right, for subscription businesses. And we were working with companies across scale, but I was particularly looking at what happens between the startup to scale up phase, that, where organizations come into a product like Chargebee as the first subscription solution of choice. Because like most other B2B infra level products, you always start with a build problem, right? You always start by trying to shoehorn existing solutions and duct tape stuff, just get something working. And you really only start looking for a solution when things start going out of hand. And in ChargeBee's case, we spoke to a ton of customers across different levels of scale. And we found a very interesting thing. A lot of businesses, small businesses, would start off manually sending out invoices and just having a spreadsheet somewhere, tracking customer records. And when they need to send out the next invoice for renewal, probably have a couple of in-house outsourced bookkeepers doing this job. And it would be okay. Let's say at the very early stages when you have 5 invoices and 10 invoices and 15 and 20 and 25, and then it starts getting a little iffy, but you can still add a couple more bookkeepers or extend your time a little bit. But then we realized there was this golden number at 450 invoices, and that was the tipping point. Typically, when an organization had 450 invoices, that was when things started getting unruly, super messy.
Falling apart.
Be like, all right, you know what? We need a solution. There needs to be a better solution for this, right? And so that's the 0th moment of truth that we were able to figure out. Now, that's a very specific example, and we were fortunate in that there's this golden number, or at least this golden range of numbers where the problem becomes particularly relevant. But you could extend this into pretty much any product, into, say, a marketing automation system or a CRM, pretty much any solution out there. And there is a very specific point in a customer's life where they're like, hey, you know what? Things are getting messy. I need a better way to get stuff done.
Yeah, it's where my takeaway for this is it's where the pain point gets too big, right?
Correct. And yeah, it's where the pain point gets to the level of, hey, you know what? I'm not just gonna, it's not worth it to keep pushing through this pain or trying to like pop a couple of painkillers and move on. We need to go in and rethink, right? So another way I like to think about this, Steve, is our customers, like all our decisions are this constant battle between the amount of pain or the value that we expect and the barrier to change, right? So there's always a wall that we want to jump, right? Or that a wall that stands in the way. It's our existing way of doing things, the way things have always been, the status quo, whatever. And then there's the value at the other side of the wall, right? And as marketers, we try to do 2 things. We are constantly trying to showcase that this value at the other side is amazing and beautiful. And we're also trying to show how this barrier, this wall, actually isn't as tall as it has to be. How can we break down this wall, bring it down in a light, right? And that's a constant battle. And there is a very specific sequence of things that happens in our customers' lives where they're like, hey, you know what? I need to pole vault across this wall. And that's the point that we are interested in, especially as account-based marketers, where timing is super critical.
So you've kept referencing over and over again, understanding the customer, right? And getting in and really being able to understand those inflection points and where they want to pole vault over that wall. And in our previous conversations, you called it, we have to have a customer obsession, really.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't understand them and we're not obsessive about it, we're not going to understand the ZMOT, right? We're not going to understand a lot. We're not going to understand how to message them. We're not going to understand how to consult with them. We're not going to understand really their total world that they live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like ChargeBee, as an example, is a really great solution, but it doesn't cover the ICP that you're selling into. They have responsibilities across this much, right? And this helps with a very important amount of this much, but we have to understand their total job. We have to understand their pain points overall. We understand the risks that they're taking in bringing on a new solution and how they think about it. So tell me a little bit about customer obsession. And as a CMO, how do you think about customer obsession and then bring that into the marketing process and specifically understanding their ZMOT?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, right? Because it's got so much nuance to it. So let's break it into a couple of pieces, right? Like first, I like to think of like, I like, how do I say this? All right. So I think customer obsession is super critical. But then again, you could become too pigeonholed into one or a few types of customers and stop seeing the bigger picture, right? Let's say integration workflows, right? Like most B2B products at some point end up having integration workflow capabilities that they need to build out. And if you looked too deep into every individual customer, and you will notice that every single customer has a very different need out of your integration workflows. And so it's going to be an impossible engineering solution. But then if you took a couple of steps back and you looked at it as the larger context, you would see certain buckets start to emerge. All right. So there is a very specific CRM/sales enablement problem. There's a finance problem. There's a marketing problem. There's a product problem. There's a ticketing problem. Yeah. And so on. So I like to think about customer obsession in two lenses. One is, let's say, the behavioral lens, going in and looking into individual customers and mapping out what the stakeholder map inside the organization looks like. Who are the actual users? What are they using this for? What's their pain? Why do they have this pain? And so on. And the second lens is to look at this in an aggregated view, into looking at the customer as a flow of jobs and values and tasks, right? That the customer is going back to the jobs to be done framework. The customer is hiring your product to perform a very specific job in their worldview, and understanding that from a very 100 feet view, an aggregated view across at least segments of customers becomes super critical. But I'll give you, I know anytime we talk about customers and customer obsession, one of the biggest problems is it gets very vague very quickly. So I'm going to try and add a little bit of color, maybe with some specifics, particularly from some super fun things that we learned and implemented at ChargeBee, right? We went into this drive of understanding more about our customers. And one of the big problems that we had, again, at ChargeBee as a subscription billing and revenue management platform back in the day, was we had this whole variety of ideal customers coming into our sales mix. We would, of course, have the CFO and the finance org deeply involved, because at the end of the day, this is revenue and bookings and invoicing. We would have sales involved because, again, this is about how you're going to price, how you're going to discount and upsell and CPQs and deal desks and all of that stuff. And then we'd have product involved, and therefore the product org and the CPO would be very deeply involved, because for most subscription, say SaaS businesses, your pricing and packaging and entitlements and what feature goes to which customers is a very key thing built into product.
Right.
And you very soon you would have sales, product, finance, operations, and you would have folks across from C-level all the way down to individual developers and individual operations folks that are getting involved into the mix. And it starts looking kind of very messy, because what you want out of this kind of an experiment is to say, you know what, there is this particular one persona with this particular title at this particular level with this problem, and that's the superstar that we need to build around. And so this was actually very annoying and very, very disturbing, if I may, right? As someone that's going in from a very scientific data view. But going into building out the jobs to be done, what are they actually hiring a product like ChargeBee for? And why did each of these people come into ChargeBee? And we figured that every single one of these people realized or came to the ZMOT of ChargeBee because they were frustrated with how their revenue was being operationalized. The finance person was frustrated with the fact that they were missing out on invoices. They weren't able to payments smart enough. The sales guy and the CRO was frustrated that they weren't able to offer a package to a customer quickly enough with the flexibility that they wanted. Product was frustrated that they weren't able to experiment and have more detailed view of how product and packaging and pricing can sync and get work done. The developer was frustrated with the 7,000 lines of code that they had to debug and figure out every time anything went into production. And so you have all of these folks, and they have a singular problem, which is a revenue operationalization problem. And that was the light bulb moment for us, right? So that's the ZMOT. So it doesn't matter who you are, but at a certain point, there is a hat you wear, which is how can I bring in operational efficiencies in my revenue workflow? And when you wear that hat, that's the persona that we wanted.
So that's the main message, and it gets articulated or translated a little bit different if you're talking to the CRO versus the CFO. But what you're talking about here is where most organizations find themselves, right? The buying committee inside over the last like 10, 15 years has grown 3 to 4 times. You might be looking at organizations where there's maybe 15 people that can say no. They can't all say yes, but they can also be a very strong advocate for no, right? So you have to influence them. So this customer obsession, the point that you're trying to make here, if I'm getting this right, is that you have to be obsessed not only with the key person, like you would think in charge would be the CFO might be like the key person, right? But then you're finding out if you can articulate the problem beyond the role of the CFO in their office and how it's impacting every department in the entire organization, now you've raised the level. The problem has been redefined into the point where you're right. We can't just sit here and do it the way that we've always done it, right? This isn't just about me and getting invoices and reconciling them and making sure we're not losing revenue, but we're also at the front end, we're not closing business the way that we should be, right? So what is your recommendation then? Because basically what we're getting into now is an ABM model, right? And so this customer obsession and the ZMOT moment, how do you look at this in a go-to-market strategy and an ABM process?
Yeah. Okay. A lot of thesis, I think, across the marketing world, and specifically for me, we're still evolving on this question, right? I would say I have about 40, 50% confidence in what I'm saying, but there's a very good chance for our listeners out there that 50% of this is super untested and I'm still trying to figure myself out. So if you have better ideas, probably drop them in the discussions. But we as marketers, especially as inbound driven software marketers, we've had this at least for a very long time, we've been very comfortable looking at our world as singular funnels of leads and MQLs and SQLs and SALs and opportunities and as a single linear flow. And then we've had outbounding where we'd have here's 10,000 contacts and their email IDs and their LinkedIn profiles and their phone numbers, and let's just go hit them in as many ways as possible. And let's hope that by the mere magic of large numbers, we get something at the other end of the funnel. And they had their run. I think I'm not going to diss some of the other channels that do make sense for some organizations, but in my view, the world of B2B marketing, particularly for mid-market and enterprise, has been gradually shifting away to a more account-based model where it's super critical that we understand what the relationship map within our customers org looks like. There are multiple, like I said, there's a buying company. There are multiple folks involved. They talk to each other. There are champions, there are detractors, there are people who are going to be very excited about one axis of your product. And then there are going to be other people who are going to ask very uncomfortable questions of our champions. And so we're actually now building a movement within each organization, which means the metrics, the models that we have for how we approach marketing, everything changes, right? So ABM is not just another channel anymore. And I know that's not a direct answer to the question, but I want to stress on that because we say ABM and our immediate thought is, all right, so let's get a list of accounts. Let's use a couple of enrichment tools and then let's plaster LinkedIn ads on these. And all of those are very essential steps in LinkedIn, the account building, the enrichment, the distribution, but there's just this huge layer in the middle which is actually building out that account intelligence. That's building out, all right, so why would this account actually need us? Are they at the right moment? And who in this organization is at that right moment? And then how do we build out that engagement movement within that account to convert?
So let me ask you something on all of this, because I mean, you just accentuated the importance and the role of ABM. One of the things that this, leading from understanding, be obsessed, understanding your customer to the point where you understand where that ZMOT moment is, and then how to articulate that throughout a buying committee. That's identifying the problem and identifying the inflection point and identifying the way that the message needs to be split up and basically personalized throughout the buying committee. Here's one thing I want to ask your opinion on is we all know over time, we've done this time and time again. I've had CMOs on the podcast, CROs on the podcast that absolutely believe that the best way to communicate is to always communicate with the voice of the customer before or leading the voice of the company.
Mm-hmm.
The voice of the customer is the voice of the peer community who we're selling to, right? Mm-hmm. So if they hear from their peers, so this translation of this ZMOT moment, right? And then translation into the various aspects of and people within the buying committee, if they're hearing, now you're a CRO and you're hearing from another CRO that has been using Chargebee and it solves so many of the problems. Mm-hmm. And then you heard if you were a CEO or if you were in operations or chief product officer, and you were hearing from other chief product officers that had benefited from the use of Chargebee, all of a sudden, that speaks volumes. So this, to me, this customer obsession is also how do we translate their successes, right, that we've been helping them with? And how does that voice lead ours? So we don't have to sell, we share, right? We share value added, we share how others have succeeded. That's a very different approach, right? To coming in and saying, here are the features and the benefits, which have a huge role to play in the ABM sales process. Mm-hmm. But it was a quote out of a Forbes magazine article, and it said, content marketing solves problems, thought leadership sparks conversations. We want to be sparking conversations throughout the buying committee, which means we got to be consultative with them, right? Mm-hmm. This ABM process is about being thought leaders. And so I just wanted to ask, in this customer obsession model, what do you think about that? And do you agree with that customer obsession needs to turn into then a customer voice? We understand and turn that into a customer voice that leads ours and helps throughout the whole ABM sales process.
Yes, I agree at the philosophy level, right? I agree that, in fact, more than agree, I think that's the point. Like the point of ZMOT and customer research and customer obsession is that we build a very strong voice of the customer. We have a very strong image of the customer as a guiding beacon to pretty much all our thought work as an organization and leading our marketing efforts and so on and so forth. That said, I want to be very cautious about when we say, all right, so what we need as voice of the customer is let's get one customer or a bunch of customers to come in and share a quote or a testimonial, and then we'll use that as the spearhead in our marketing movement, which is, again, perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with it, except that I think Andrew Chen coined this phrase years ago, which goes the law of shitty click-throughs, right? Like you give like any tool that we programmatize as marketers, eventually we programmatize it so well that our customers can start, noticing that the lack of authenticity, right? They can smell the weirdness out. And so in today's world where most businesses and most products lead with product and features, leading with value and end goal is great. in a world where most businesses are predominantly just talking about inside out, their value, their thing, their capabilities, bringing in the voice of the customer kind of creates, or bringing in a customer to the front and showcasing this from their voice adds that layer of authenticity. One of the biggest questions that any new prospect has with a business first starts with, all right, so what is this thing? Moves on to why, why does it matter? And then before they get into how does it work, they care for why should I believe you? Bringing in, making a customer the spokesperson of your organization definitely answers that why should I believe you? Because here is another peer that you can relate with that seems to be enjoying the service. But again, the point of customer obsession and going into looking at the world from our customers' lens is that we can avoid the beige, we can avoid the weirdness that the customer sniffs out, and we can ensure that we're always fresh because we are relevant to the pain that the customer has today.
It's the bottom line. You articulated it very well here. Why are we talking? Why is this important? Why do I trust you? And the other one is, okay, who else has used this and what's happened? Right? And other people like me, how has it impacted them? Right? And it's just that voice of authenticity. We as an organization are sellers, no matter what. We are a sales organization overall. And so just bringing in the voice of their peer community, whether it's customers or just their peers in period, validating that there is a problem without even saying that what the solution is. But a big part of what we do is we elaborate on what the problem is. We educate them on how big the problem is, because we as humans, when we don't know what to do with something, we get used to it. And we get used to just living with a problem, right? And then therefore it gets diminished in terms of something we really got to spend time in addressing, right? So a big part of what we do is like that voice of the customer or the voice of their peer community is just powerful and authentic in building trust, and that this is a problem that they really do need to think about, and that others that are doing the exact same things that they are have said, absolutely, this is too big to ignore. So I love that I bring all this up because I love your customer obsession, and I wanted to build it out into customer obsession is a lot more than understanding of the customer, but it's also bringing that voice of the customer forward. And I think we need to get better. It's more than here's some quotes and a written case study and things like that. We need to get as creative about how we bring that voice of the customer forward as well.
There's a ton of tools out there. And okay, before we close out on that particular topic, the customer obsession is not, and we don't get super excited and go down the wrong path, in my opinion. So it's not about sitting on every customer support call. It's not about, let me call my entire customer base every week and have a 3-hour conversation with them. It's not about any of that. It's not about going in and offering discounts, or it's not about all of that is great, right? Like, it's a good habit to sit through customer support calls. It's a great idea to consume the first calls that we have with the customers, typically at the SDR qualification level, or the first touch with sales, the first real human conversation that we have with a prospect. It's a great idea to consume all of that. But what we're trying to build is we're trying to build a thesis, and there's great tools. There's, for example, I love the ZMOT method. There's jobs to be done, which is filling out what exactly is the job that a customer is hiring our product to do. There's the value prop canvas, which is trying to build out what are the pains, gains, capabilities mapped to the pain relievers, gain creators, and expectations of the customer. So creates a product to customer map, and where we sit in this entire value prop hierarchy. There's the hero's journey narrative, where we're trying to build out the customer as a hero and what is their entire story through our product. So there's a ton of different frameworks out there. These are my favorites. My favorites are ZMOT, Jobs to be Done, Value Prop Canvas, and the hero's journey. I'm sure there are many more, and a lot of these are very intuitive, but that's what we're trying to build out at an aggregate level. We're trying to build these out. And then if we built it out to, let's say, our entire customer base of, I don't know, let's say thousands of customers, it's just going to get very vague and not precise. So then we start segmenting our customers. Do we want to say, does this map look different if we break it out by, say, size of the organization, or level of pain, or level of involvement, or types of stakeholders in the mix? And then we start seeing the very interesting patterns emerge. And that's what feeds into customer obsession.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before we started recording here today, we talked about, we had probably about 5 hours worth of stuff that we wanted to talk about. If based on everything that we've been talking about, what if there was one main takeaway? Like if the audience was going to take away one thing from our episode here today, what would that be?
Oh, I'm going to say a lot of marketing has fancy jargons and cool terms and stuff, including ZMOT, which is very nice. And I would say if there's only one jargon that you need to absolutely care about, it should be ZMOT, because I absolutely love it. But jokes apart, I think the next wave of where we're going into marketing with ABM becoming front and center, it's super important that we go back to governing dynamics, that we go back to, let's forget all of the rules that we made up along the way, keyword density and this and that and channel capacity and all of those fancy things. And let's go back to governing dynamics of, all right, so we have a bunch of target accounts, and are we able to build out the stakeholder map of this? Are we able to understand why somebody needs to come to us for it? And then let's figure out the distribution tactics for it, right? And I say this because the other part, let's figure out the distribution tactics and let's actually get there. The amount of growth in MarTech in that space, at least let's say in the last 24 months, has been insane, right? There are like tools that help us do everything from list building to analysis to enrichment to chart building to even understanding where, like the status quo of each customer, tools that provide intent signals for who might be researching and who might be the most primed to actually try our product today. So there's products out there that we can stitch together in a matter of, say, 3 days to get this entire machine rolling. The only key piece missing is understanding what are we going to say, who are we going to say it to, and how do we want to say it.
I love it. I think that was one main takeaway, or I think it was a bunch, but I think there's going to be a lot of questions after this. And would it be appropriate that we gave out like a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you if they had questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn as /MarkAlive or Vikram Bhaskaran. And absolutely.
Fantastic. Vikram, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And I love hearing the stories too about like with Chargebee and how you found your ZMOT and then how you translated that core problem into the different areas of the buying committee, right? But it focused around one central event. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from today is how do we look for events that trigger the pain points that then we can start to then articulate how big that is, how we do that, and how we translate it to the rest of the buying committee. I thought this has been fantastic and just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Steve. It was super fun. Starting from the prep calls, every conversation with you has been super fun. So thank you so much for having me.